All right. I should be live, and we are talking about how the Alien Enemies Act has been invoked for the first time since World War II, which sets quite a precedent when you start thinking about it in the context of where we are currently in the world, especially geopolitically. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. And of course, I'm Magic Prepper, and you all are here. And I see 5x5s coming in. The goggles do nothing. Is throwing it out there with the 5x5, and I appreciate it. Thank you for letting me know we can get started and that you can hear and see me. And of course, anyone who's on replay crew, make sure you check in the comments section. I always appreciate seeing you say hello, and I appreciate you coming back to get this information. 5x5's coming in from Harbor Prepper, Derek. We also have Robert P. and Sherman Sales with the HK by MP5, which is also a great rating. So, Quality Control, good to see you. 5x5 coming in your way as well. Johnny D. and Brian says 2x2. So, I apologize, Brian, but something's not working out between us, I guess. So, let's get going because the Alien Enemies Act has been invoked, and it's a very interesting trajectory we're currently on. And if you look at things as being singular, it's hard to consider this to be related to everything else happening in the world. But when you start looking back in history a little bit and you realize that, well, the last time we did this was World War II, and the time before that was World War I, and the time before that was the War of 1812, then you start really understanding where we currently are in regards to the volatility around the entire world. So, let's get going. Kevin Brown says SIG by 320. So, I guess I'm dropping the ball, you know? Let's talk about what just happened. Now, this is relevant to your preparedness. Why is that? Because this is going to be continually happening. It's not just happening one time and one time only. And this is going to affect these people that are out there illegally involved in crime that are considered to be targets of this type of invocation. And at the same time, it just goes to show you how many of these people are in your community, in your town, in your local area. And the fact that they're operating to the point of being mass deportated in this way should be awakening. Not to mention the fact that one of the most, I guess you would say, historically egregious things that's happened in the United States involved this exact Enemy Aliens Act, because it was in regards to the Japanese concentration camps. So this can get out of control, but as of right now, it's being used for what we were told this new administration was going to do, which was to crack down on illegal immigration, crack down on the crime caused by illegal immigrants, and deport them. And this is exactly what you're seeing. However, there are some interesting things happening here, also based on our current government and the way things are working, that goes to show you just how vitriolic it's becoming, okay? So U.S. defies court order, deports Venezuelans to El Salvador, including some El Salvadorians as well. The Trump administration invoked a wartime law from the 18th century to rapidly deport Venezuelans to El Salvador. A federal judge had issued an order temporarily banning the expulsions, which, by the way, was ignored. So now we're definitely in some interesting territory. The U.S. has deported more than 200 alleged members of a Venezuelan gang to El Salvador by invoking a rarely used wartime law. And we are going to talk about the Alien Enemies Act here in just a minute to kind of build context and give you some ideas about what it actually is and what it's used for, to give you a more clear view as to where we are right now on the timeline of World War III, because although we've had a new administration and we've had some change here in the United States, World War III had already begun prior to this, at least in my opinion, and many others as well. And you don't just suddenly pull out of that or get to turn it off because somebody new took over power. So this is the trajectory it's currently turning into. And I do think there's some things we could consider later on in the conversation tonight about who might be considered someone we could work with in the future if things keep going in the way that we're currently witnessing, which we'll talk about soon. But back to the Alien Enemies Act, okay? The deportations took place despite a federal judge's order temporarily banning the expulsions. Today, the first 238 members of the Venezuelan criminal organization, Tren de Aragua, arrived in our country. Salvadorian President Nayib Bukele, or is it Bukele? I'm not sure. I can't remember, said Sunday on X. Bukele, which sounds better to me, I guess, said the U.S. had also sent 23 members of the Salvadorian gang MS-13. His post included a video of several men in handcuffs being transferred from a plane to a heavily guarded convoy. Now, of course, there's video and everything else here, which you can see, but obviously if I play that, we could have some issues, so we're just going to skip past that. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio also confirmed the deportations. Hundreds of violent criminals were sent out of the country, he said in a statement. I want to express my sincere gratitude to President Nayib Bukele of El Salvador for playing a pivotal role in this transfer. Now, Lori Neal Morin says loud and clear, and I appreciate you. Robert P. says good evening from Pack and WNRN Rockies. Good to see you. And we also have Dustin Pribble here. Good to see you as well. So every Monday night, we get some great people here in the chat. And one thing I would suggest is that while you're here, you might as well network with some of these people because we're all here for the same reason, which means we have a like-minded approach to things regarding preparedness. And you might be able to network with somebody in your area. So I always support that and encourage it because we're going to need each other at some point in time if things really fall apart. Brad Miller, hello from Fargo. Well, hello to you from the western side of the state. So we aren't quite neighbors, but at least we're in the same state. Brendan, you're late. You made it, and we're not mad. And you're not actually late. You arrived just when you wanted to. So back to the story at hand. On Friday, U.S. President Donald Trump signed an order invoking the Wartime Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to bypass normal immigration procedures and rapidly expel the migrants. The order applied to all Venezuelan Tren de Aragua members who are over 14 and not naturalized U.S. citizens or lawful permanent residents. And so I think people get this misconstrued when it comes to the way the media reports on it and everything else, but this specifically does have outlines of who qualifies and who doesn't regarding their immigration status, and it's within reason in the sense of they're not an actual citizen or a lawful permanent resident or they're underage, right? So like, make sure you read through everything before you just believe what the media tells you regarding, who is being targeted and who's allowed to be deported in this manner and everything else. The wartime authority has only been invoked 3 times before during the War of 1812, World War I, and World War II. Late Saturday, U.S. District Judge James E. Boasberg suspended the application for the law for 14 days. But by then, the Venezuelans were reportedly already on a flight to El Salvador. The Trump administration has filed an appeal against Saturday's court decision. White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt denied that officials had refused to comply with the court order, as she said the deportees had already left the United States. A single judge in a single city cannot direct the movements of an aircraft carrier full of foreign alien terrorists who were physically expelled from U.S. soil, she wrote in a statement. What did Venezuela say? Venezuela's government condemned Trump's use of the anachronistic law, calling it illegal and in violation of human rights against our migrants. It described the step as evocative of the darkest episodes in human history, from slavery to the horror of the concentration camps. And Venezuela also called on the international community, especially the community of Latin American and Caribbean states, to oppose what it called a dangerous precedent. Interesting for Venezuela to say something when they treat their people very badly, but this is what they wanted to say. And I find it interesting when they say against our migrants, because are they your migrants once they've left and they are in another country? I'm not sure if that's exactly how that works. Where are the alleged gang members being held? Bukele said the alleged Tren de Aragua members had been taken to the country's maximum security terrorism confinement center, CICOT. The facility is a notorious mega prison southeast of the capital, San Salvador, with a capacity for 40,000 prisoners. The Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua had been linked to kidnapping, extortion, organized crime, and contract killings. It was not immediately clear what charges that alleged members of the group would face in El Salvador and whether children were among those who were deported, even though we were just told that they had to be over 14. So I guess technically if 15, 16, and 17-year-olds were deported, then that would be considered, at least by law in many places, children. So it is what it is. That's what's being reported. Now, here's the thing. Why is this happening? Because the Alien Enemies Act is more of like a wartime power. But you have to understand, recently these organizations were considered foreign terrorist organizations, right? So all of this stuff is starting to add up and compile to create this perfect storm of wartime powers to be used basically on American soil in regards to certain groups and organizations. And although it might be for a righteous purpose right now, and it is possibly something that's required in order to restabilize law and order and restabilize our border and the national security risks that are involved with allowing that many people to flow in who have these nefarious ties. It is something we should watch out for just in case it goes too far, because regardless of my current support for this administration, I still have to be a vigilant and due diligent American to say, okay, at a certain point we might have to take a look at what we're really doing here, which I think is healthy for all of us to do. No matter who's in the government, I'm always going to be skeptical of the government. Why? Because that's just how I've always been. It's been my entire life. Now, DB Cooper, salute to you as well from Hazen. Oh, that's good to know. Another nearby neighbor. Now, happy St. Patrick's Day, says Coltrane, and I say that to you as well. I hope you all are enjoying your St. Patrick's Day, however you are. I'm sober, so I guess there's that. Let's talk about the Alien Enemies Act, because I want to just go over this a little bit with everybody so you're aware of what this actually means and why it kind of, if you look at it from an outside perspective, it kind of demonstrates what part of this world war that we've been currently going through for years now we're actually in. Because steps are being taken to, move further, and we're seeing that in foreign ways as well, which we're going to discuss tonight, because of course there's new developments in other parts of the world that I find interesting. But let's go ahead and do this first, because I really want to make sure we all have a good grasp of what's happening right now. The Alien Enemies Act explained, all right? This is from the Brennan Center for Justice. What is the Alien Enemies Act? The Alien Enemies Act of 1798 is a wartime authority that allows the president to detain or deport the natives and citizens of an enemy nation. The law permits the president to target these immigrants without a hearing and based only on their country of birth or citizenship. Although the law was enacted to prevent foreign espionage and sabotage in wartime, it can be and has been wielded against immigrants who have done nothing wrong, have evinced no signs of disloyalty, and are lawfully present in the United States. It's an overboard authority that may violate constitutional rights in wartime and is subject to abuse in peacetime. So, listen. Everybody who's being deported right now, I have to assume, has been targeted for specific reasons involving criminal activity as part of these foreign terrorist organizations, which is now what they are labeled, right? And at that point in time, they would be considered enemies of the state. So I think there's a lot of qualifiers there that would actually justify this action. However, like I said, it has been used before in ways that nowadays most of us would look back and say we don't agree with that behavior. So we have to keep an eye out for anything to develop further beyond what we're currently witnessing. And I just want to verify that we're all capable of doing that by going through this information. The Alien Enemies Act has been invoked 3 times, each time during a major conflict: the War of 1812, World War I, and World War II. Now, this is the 4th time. So one thing I want you to consider regarding that is that why are we doing it now for the 4th time? When was it used before? 1812, World War I, World War II. What would you consider right now to be, right? So you either have to say, and it was also invoked when America was overran by illegal immigrant gangs who were criminal in nature, right? Which, okay, I guess that's what is technically happening right now. But in reality, and from my point of view, it's more along the lines of it's been invoked 4 times: the War of 1812, World War I, World War II, and World War III. And I only say that because we still have a hot war in Europe. We still have a hot war in the Middle East. We still have China ramping up escalations regarding Taiwan and the South China Sea, as well as in the Pacific. And things have just gone further throughout the entire planet regarding wartime escalation. So I have a hard time not feeling like this is just another piece of evidence for the argument that we're currently within, once again, another world war. But this is just one piece of evidence, so you can weigh that out however you like, but this is just where my mind tends to go, okay? Now, in World War I and II, the law was a key authority behind detentions, expulsions, and restrictions targeting German, Austro-Hungarian, Japanese, and Italian immigrants, based solely on their ancestry. The law is best known for its role in Japanese internment, a shameful part of U.S. history for which Congress, presidents, and the courts have apologized. And yes, I think we can all agree that those internment camps were definitely problematic during World War II. Now, I understand why the Alien Enemies Act exists, because you need to be able to deal with people on your own soil who might be sympathetic to a foreign adversary during a wartime scenario, because that's unfortunately a realistic viewpoint and an honest viewpoint of how people are, how tribalism works, and how we also know that these countries do reach out and try to recruit people from the motherland to bring them back or at least use them as an asset within enemy territory. So it's a realistic thing that needs to exist, but it's not something that can be used with impunity, because it does cross lines, and it, in my opinion, during any wartime scenario is likely to cross lines at some point in time based on the parameters involved. Under what conditions can the president invoke the Alien Enemies Act? The president may invoke the Alien Enemies Act in times of declared war or when a foreign government threatens or undertakes an invasion or predatory incursion against U.S. territory. Hence why it's being used right now, because this has been described for quite some time now as a foreign invasion. And so if we have this foreign invasion occurring, you can declare the Alien Enemies Act and say, we're under an invasion or a predatory incursion, so we have to use this now in order to bring back stability and security, okay? The Constitution gives Congress, not the president, the power to declare war. So the president must wait for democratic debate and a congressional vote to invoke the Alien Enemies Act based on a declared war. But the president need not wait for Congress to invoke the law based on a threatened or ongoing invasion or predatory incursion. The president has inherent authority to repel these kinds of sudden attacks, an authority that necessarily implies the discretion to decide when an invasion or predatory incursion is underway. And one thing that you have to keep in mind while we go through tonight's information, okay, is that if there's evidence of foreign adversarial migrants or immigrants on our soil that have gotten here illegally, and the same law or the same process can be applied to their situation, then it'd be easy to perceive that the Alien Enemies Act could apply to citizens of, or at least nationals from countries like Iran or China or any of these other places where we know lots of undocumented foreigners have crossed the southern border and entered our country illegally for quite some time now. And so this could apply to additional measures here in the future regarding some of those foreign adversaries. Now, here's one section I wanted to go over, and then we're going to move on because I don't want to bore you with a full-on essay about the Alien Enemies Act. But I did think it was interesting because not only was it invoked for the first time since World War II, not only is it being used in a more obscure way that isn't necessarily at face value what you would anticipate, but it also is an indicator of war. It always has been. It's only been used in major wars here in the U.S. The War of 1812 was no slouch, but definitely World War I and World War II were major, and now we're using it once again, magically, during a tumultuous period of time. But here's something I thought you should definitely be aware of too, as an American citizen, in case you aren't from America. This is still good for you to know, just to kind of see what's happening here. But if you are in America, you want to pay attention to this just in case, okay? Is there any way in which the Alien Enemies Act could be used outside of war? Although the Alien Enemies Act has only been invoked in major conflicts, Presidents Woodrow Wilson and Harry S. Truman continued using the law after the cessation of hostilities in World War I and World War II. World War I ended in 1918, but the Wilson administration used the law to intern German and Austro-Hungarian immigrants until 1920. And World War II ended in 1945, but the Truman administration used the law for the internment and deportations until 1951. In its 1948 Luedecke v. Watkins opinion, a narrow majority of the Supreme Court upheld the Truman administration's extended reliance on the Alien Enemies Act, reasoning that it was not the judiciary's place to second-guess the president on a matter as political as when a war terminates and wartime authorities expire. Okay? So, just wanted to bring that to your attention. The historical context there is that this can be used further and beyond what its intended purpose is. And I think that we should, as vigilant Americans and patriots with due diligence, be aware of these things and watch for them to be problematic, right? And I assume that the best intentions are being used currently, but we know how that can evolve over time, and it's just something that I wanted to bring to your attention. And in case anybody's unaware, it shouldn't be a big secret here, but I clearly lean in a more conservative manner, especially based on firearms rights and things of that nature. And I'm very anti-war. I don't want to see us have any additional war and all those types of things. And it's very obvious to figure out like who I would have voted for and everything else. And I even said who I voted for on the channel. But regardless, it doesn't matter who's in charge because I'm still going to question things that don't align with my point of view or that I feel could lead us towards problems in the future. So regardless, I just hope everybody understands that. And I think that's a good stance to take. No matter who you support or where you're comfortable, you should be willing to ask questions or at least push back when things don't align with your beliefs or your values. Because that's important, right? And like I said, as of right now, I feel like things are being done in a way that might be necessary and just, but things corrupt over time, and we have to pay attention to when that time may come or hope that it never does, right? So, let's see here. Habibi Father says, nothing, bro. And Race Gun says, you mean that wasn't lube? So I don't know what you guys are up to anymore, but you know what? I'm glad you're enjoying the chat tonight. And I think it sounds like some people are meeting some very special other people. So anyway, I had to jump in on that. I mean, there's a little too much to ignore there. Now, with that in mind, Alien Enemies Act invoked, first time since World War II. Let's talk about the World War III stuff that we still have on the table. And this is something that is, when we go through this information, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to tell you the information. I'm going to give you some reasons for why I understand the process here of what is happening and why we're doing what we're doing. But then I'm going to also bring some of my concerns up to you as well based on influence and things of that nature. So, obviously, it's pretty big news that we were just recently bombing the Houthis in Yemen, okay? And here we go again, dropping bombs in the Middle East, which most people are pretty much over. Like, we don't want to. But I also can understand that there's reasons for why this might be necessary that we aren't going to just put out there in the media because it would be bad optics, but let's talk about it so we can develop that, okay? Trump blames Iran for Houthi attacks on shipping after U.S. strikes in Yemen. Yeah, and listen, Iran is, at least in my opinion, on the table, and that's concerning because I really don't want to see all of that go down, but let's continue. President Trump warns that he will hold Iran responsible for any further attacks by Houthi militants on vessels in the Red Sea. In a post on Truth Social, Trump said Iran is dictating every move of the Houthis, giving them weapons, money, and intelligence. Every shot fired by the Houthis will be looked upon from this point forward as being a shot fired from the weapons and leadership of Iran, and Iran will be held responsible and suffer consequences, and those consequences will be dire. Now, here's something I'm going to say, and bear with me because I'm not sure if you'll like it or not, but this is the exact thought process that Russia has about the United States regarding Ukraine, right? Like let's just replace the words, okay? Every shot fired by Ukraine will be looked upon from this point forward as being a shot fired from the weapons and leadership of the United States of America. And the United States of America will be held responsible and suffer the consequences, and those consequences will be dire, right? So I'm not saying that we're in alignment with Russia or anything like that. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to show you that this is the same exact thought process, which is why a lot of people are confused about why one thing applies somewhere but not another place, or why it's hypocritical or anything along those lines. And regardless of that, it's definitely not within Russian alignment because Iran and Russia are close allies, and they have already asked us to basically stop doing what we're doing over there. So there's a lot of weird stuff going on in that regard, but this is still what's happening, and obviously it's setting up the table for a possible conflict with Iran, and that's problematic for me, at least because of my view of not wanting to be involved in another Middle Eastern war if possible. The president's comments come after the U.S. launched a large-scale attack against the Iran-aligned militants on Sunday, killing at least 53 people and wounding almost 100 in the Yemen capital, Sana'a, and surrounding areas, according to the Houthi-run health ministry. And just so you all know, this is from NPR and it was published today. So this is relevant and new information. And in case you're new here, we usually go over information from the previous week. And if we go back further, it's to build historical context like we just did with the Alien Enemies Act overview. So I just wanted to mention that. And if you are new here, make sure you hit the subscribe button, the like button, and the bell button so that way you'll actually see this feed come up in your notifications next week, because otherwise it probably won't. So that's just the reality of it, but here we are, okay? The Houthis began targeting dozens of military and commercial vessels shortly after the war in Gaza began in late 2023. We all know how that went, and we all know how that's been going, okay? The Houthis stopped targeting ships in January after a ceasefire was announced between Israel and Hamas, which looks like it's basically falling apart. And that's moving forward to more destruction in Gaza once again. The U.S. strikes are meant to open up international shipping lanes in the Red Sea after months of attacks by Houthi militants forced vessels to find new routes, often around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, adding time and cost to each journey and threatening global supply chains. Now, this is where I understand some of the justifications for why this is happening, but I need you to have an open mind here, okay? So, really quick, I just want to finish this out. Jonathan Roach, an analyst at Braemar ACM Shipbroking in London, says even if there is a cessation of the hostilities in the Red Sea, it's unlikely shipping vessels will return immediately. He says shipping companies need certainty. So it's probably going to take a good 3 to 6 months of no hostilities to container ships before they'll actually risk it. Now, put that timeline into your databank and apply it to a wartime scenario where one of the busiest shipping lanes in the entire world is being shut down by these Houthis targeting ships, adding cost and time to our supply chains, all within the context of being in a World War III scenario, right? Or at least at the very edge of it when it comes to open public war of foreign nuclear-powered adversaries, right? I mean, like if that's as far as you want to take it, that's fine with me because it's the same exact situation regardless. In order to be properly prepared for a real war, to face a near-peer enemy in a war right now, whether or not that's Russia or China or whoever it might be, we need the shipping lane open. We need our cost of goods to go down economically, even right now, regardless of war, because our economy has been in a death spiral for years and years now. And that bubble, I mean, in some ways may have been bursting already based on the markets and based on the price of gold, but it could get much worse. And any economic boon that can be created, regardless of whether or not it requires military intervention, is something that they're probably going to go for right now. It's basically do or die. And if they don't do some of these things to try to alleviate the pain, it's only going to get worse faster and not provide the amount of time required to repair and rebuild the economy while also being actually ready to fight a war. Now, that war could be between, obviously, the usuals, Iran, China, or Russia, or an alliance of the three. But I have some ideas about how that might be changing as we move forward tonight, and something I just want you to keep in mind, because there's an original trajectory I thought we were kind of on that made sense to me, but it wasn't necessarily what I want, but it's just what I thought was realistic. And I think things might be changing a little bit there, but not necessarily overtly. So we'll continue this conversation, but this is the only justification I can keep in mind for this scenario. We need that shipping lane open to avoid the economy fully collapsing, while also improving the economy by lowering the cost of goods because of better shipping pricing and everything else related to it, while at the same time being more prepared for a war, even if that means a war with Iran, which is more and more sounding like that's something that's like possibly going to happen. I don't want it to happen. I wish that we would just get out of there. But these things obviously have more to them than just what I know, but I know other countries are involved. So let's keep moving forward, okay? And we're going to talk about it a little bit more, okay? Let's see here. Look, a rabbit. NPR, 12 hours. Yeah, I know. NPR, the home base of Mike Muffasalan. Yeah. There's a lot of interesting things about NPR being talked about in the chat tonight. I appreciate it. T. Fisher says, thanks, Magic Prepper, and I say thank you as well. Joe Shinpa says, hello from Arkansas. And you know what? I spent my youth visiting Arkansas on summer vacations with the family at Horseshoe Bend, and I really enjoyed it. And I always have good memories of Arkansas and fishing there and catching bluegill and catching red-eared slider turtles and having the hook go through their brain, and then my grandpa cutting the line and saying, oh, he's fine, we'll throw him back. And me just believing him as a child that the turtle with a hook through its brain was going to be fine, because why would my grandpa lie, right? So let's talk about what Iran thinks about all that, because, well, they were just threatened by saying that anything coming from the Houthis comes from them and we're going to do something about it. That should tell you a lot, especially based on a wartime trajectory. Okay. Officials from Iran and its Yemeni ally have warned that any action taken against them by the United States would not go unanswered after President Donald Trump issued a stark threat amid a series of escalations in some of the world's most crucial trade corridors. One day after ordering strikes across positions linked to the Iran-aligned Ansar Allah movement, also known as the Houthis, in Yemen, Trump warned Monday in a Truth Social post that additional attacks by the group that has targeted more than 100 vessels accused of having ties to Israel will be met with great force. Okay, so we know, this confrontation's happening. I don't know what else to tell you. At face value, as of right now, if you had to ask me, hey, are we going to war with Iran? I'm going to say, yeah, it looks like it. Do I want that? No. Is there something more to it than what I understand? Probably, but that doesn't mean I can defend it, because I don't want us to go to war with Iran. But I do understand why we need to open up the shipping lanes. And this is the same exact reason why we're being so bullish about the Panama Canal. They're the same thing. It's not that they're two separate things with two separate agendas. No, it's the same agenda. It's open up these shipping lanes, gain control of them, use them to our economic advantage, and prepare ourselves and posture ourselves properly to have supply chains that flow properly during a war with a near-peer adversary. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of that justifies all these aggressive moves regarding shipping corridors, right? It's reasonable and real and understandable. Not to mention the aspect of avoiding a full-blown economic collapse. Hey, by the way, we just opened up, billions of dollars in trade value by cleaning up these shipping corridors, right? I can see the writing on the wall, and I can understand the strategy. I don't like the idea of going to war with Iran, and I don't like that it's clearly being pushed by another foreign country, right? Which we're going to talk about, don't worry. One day after ordering strikes, we already talked about that. The president asserted that Iran had full control over the Houthis and that Tehran would also be held responsible and suffer consequences, and those consequences would be dire. Iranian permanent representative to the United States, Amir Saeed Ervana, hit back in a letter shared with Newsweek and sent to UN leadership, warning that recent belligerent statements by senior officials of the United States administration, including the president of the United States, while they were attempting desperately to unlawfully justify the U.S. acts of aggression and war crimes against Yemen, leveling baseless accusations against the Islamic Republic of Iran, and openly threatening the use of force against Iran. While committed to its obligations to international peace and security, the Islamic Republic of Iran will resolutely defend its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and national interests under international law against any hostile action. So the stage is set for there to be an interaction. Everybody said their piece now. Hey, if you do this or they do this, it's basically you doing this. And if you do this or they do this, I'm going to hit you. And then they're saying, well, if you hit us or you do this or they do this, we're going to hit you back. We've seen this before between Iran and Israel. Now, let's talk about the Israel influence, because it's definitely part of this equation. Now, listen, one thing I always want to go ahead and say. Every nation and every sovereign group of people is always going to put their priorities ahead of anybody else's. So I understand what's happening, and I get it. Doesn't mean I agree with it, and it doesn't mean I like it. But I understand it, because I would do the same thing. If someone said, would you do the best thing possible for America if it meant, all these other things happening that wouldn't be that great for everyone else? There's a good chance I'm going to say, yeah. So sorry, but that's just the truth. Regardless, here we are. Now, I'm going to talk about this story first, because I think it goes back into the Alien Enemies Act, and it goes not necessarily directly, but it's that level of interaction between people who are here with questionable migration status mixed with being deported based on activities, and why we need to be vigilant about it and why we should be concerned about it, regardless of whether or not you agree with it. And then we're going to talk about how Israel seems to be feeding the flames for justification of a war with Iran, and how they're going to boost morale and get public opinion on board with the concept. Because something just came out from their news yesterday that basically is like the biggest piece of propaganda I've ever seen. So I just wanted to share with you because I have to. We can't just protect people or like things or support things just blindly. We have to be willing to criticize where we can. And so like it doesn't matter if you support or denounce, Ukraine or Israel or any of these other countries. Like you have to just be logical and take a step back and take in the information for what it is and develop a informed opinion about it. So that's what we're going to do right now. Let's do that. First off, ICE arrests another individual who participated in anti-Israel Colombia protests. Now, we had one individual who was very high profile that this already happened to, but now Laca Cordia was also arrested based on an outdated student visa. But this is where things get a little bit problematic for me, just because there's a very gray line here, a thin line where things get crossed to a certain degree where it becomes not okay. And I don't know if we're there already or if we're right on the edge of it, because I just don't fully understand every aspect of how this works. But I do know it's something I'm going to keep an eye on, because there's a point here where this becomes not okay, right? Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers arrested a second student who participated in anti-Israel protests at Columbia University after a third student opted to deport themselves from the U.S. Laca Cordia, who is from the West Bank, had a student visa canceled in 2022 for lack of attendance and was detained by the agency for the outdated visa. DHS said Cordia was previously arrested in April for an alleged role in the protests, but the New York Police Department told Fox News Digital it does not have an arrest record under their name. Columbia has no record of this individual being registered as a current or former student at the university said in a statement. It is a privilege to be granted a visa to live and study in the United States of America, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said in a statement, which I agree with. And here's the thing, like if you're not following the terms of your visa, like you're not enrolled in school anymore, or you have too many absences or whatever it is, or you're involved in illegal activities, or because a protest is allowed, but there's a point where a protest becomes illegal based on the activities occurring within said protest. So if you're part of that and it becomes illegal and now you're involved in illegal activity and your visa's expired because you didn't follow your terms, sure, being deported would make sense at that point in time. However, there's also the issue of being targeted directly because of certain aspects of what it was you were involved in, rather than it just being blanketed towards everyone, which is what it should be if we're going to do this. Anyone who's out of line with the terms of their visas or whatever it is that brought them to this country, who are now in a legal purgatory regarding their status, that it should apply to them all equally. But instead, this is what's happening. Now listen, I don't support these protests at these universities. I am not someone who's going to ever support, Hamas or any of these other groups or anything along those lines. And at this point in time, those groups are considered foreign terrorist organizations, which means that there is a possibility of being involved with material support of a foreign terrorist organization by being involved with some of these protest movements, because a lot of that money gets moved around within those same organizations. So there's a lot of things happening here, but there's just a red flag and a level of concern for me here when we start searching out particular individuals based on a political stance or based on the criticism of another country or whatever it might be, rather than it applying to everybody equally in a way that makes sense. If you want to do this full bore and just, dump everyone who's out of compliance because they're not willing to do what their terms of their visa said they had to do, then go for it, right? If that's the law, that's the law. And if you don't like that, then get the law changed. But at this point in time, clearly it's political in nature in many ways, right? Especially regarding Israel. And so I have issues with this just because how quickly could this be used against anyone else, especially in future administrations, which might not be of the same brand. So if you have the Democrats back in office in the future, what are they going to do about people who have dissenting opinions about this or that? And how could they use similar laws to persecute those people, right? And of course they have already, don't get me wrong, but I'm just trying to say, there should be a level of concern here, at least in my opinion, okay? Now here's where I agree, that things need to be clamped down on. When you advocate for violence and terrorism, that privilege should be revoked and you should not be in this country. I'm glad to see one of the Columbia University terrorist sympathizers use the CBP Home app to self-deport. I understand that. And look, I agree. If you're advocating for the destruction of America, or you're advocating for terroristic activities, and you're literally promoting the idea of like hurting other people because they disagree with your political stance or ideology, then yeah, you don't need to be here. Like, I don't care about you. Like, you got to go, because that's not what we do here. But at the same time, like, just be aware of how quickly this can spiral into something not good, right? So like, we have to be reasonable about these things. But this is, first off, one of those things where, of course, and optically, I mean, often lately, regardless of what your level of support is or like how you feel about it, which is totally a personal opinion that you're supposed to have, right? And it just is what it is. But like lately in the optics section, you know, Israel is doing a lot of Sig Sauer P320 type stuff. So it's just really problematic. Okay, so to jump into why I brought that up, it's clear that not only are they influencing what we're doing domestically regarding targeting people based on their stance or based on their status or whatever it is, which I like I said, if this person's supporting terrorist organizations with material support and everything else, or even just promoting the actions of those organizations, I don't care, get rid of them, but it needs to be for everyone who does that, not just for a few select people who were chosen based on who they went up against, right? Now, here's where I think Israel is just plowing the way forward to go to war with Iran. And I don't want to go to a war with Iran. Like, I don't want us to. Like, I really don't want to see that happen. Now, I know Israel's been at war with Iran. I know they're our ally, and I know that there are obligations there that might require us to be part of this situation. However, they're using that to their advantage at this point in time to move things forward at a breakneck speed because there's nothing stopping them, right? And I understand why, from their point of view, get rid of Iran, get rid of a lot of their problems. Can't blame them for that. Like I said, you're always going to prioritize your people and your group and everything else related to like what you care about over anything else regardless, right? So I get that. But that's the problem, is that I do that for America, and this isn't what I want for America in the sense of going to another war in the Middle East. So like, this is where I have conflicts of interest, I guess we'll say. But this should tell you what they're trying to do. This is 100% an excellent example of sell it to the public propaganda campaign. Like, I don't know what else to call this. So I just want to show you this because I don't like it, okay? And this is what you should watch out for from any other government on the planet. It doesn't matter if it's Israel. It doesn't matter if it's the U.S. It doesn't matter who it is. This is pure propaganda trying to get morale and public support to go to war. And so now if we watch out for these things, we see them for what they are, it helps us develop a better opinion about this type of information when it's delivered to us about our own countries or whatever it may be, okay? Iranian ex-officers to Israeli TV. Israel should bomb Khamenei's home, help topple regime. They said so, right? A man said to be a retired colonel, said to be, right? Like, see how this, like this is why I wanted to bring this up, because it's so blatantly obvious what it is, okay? And I'm trying my best to, like, be descriptive about it, okay? But this is where problems occur, right? A man said to be a retired colonel in the Iranian Air Force urged Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to facilitate a coup by striking the home of Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei in an interview with Israel's Channel 12 broadcast on Saturday. Netanyahu needs to order an attack on Khamenei's home, said the man. And we, the military, can take over sensitive political centers and officially announced Iran's freedom and friendship with Israel, he added. I mean, is that a real thing? I don't know. But, like, he's said to be a retired colonel. So, the man, whose face was blurred and who used the pseudonym Arash, also claimed that 95% of Iranians were pleased with the IDF's retaliatory strikes on military sites in the Islamic Republic, which he said has taken us, the people, hostage. So they need to go to war with Iran to liberate the Iranians. Clearly, that's what's being said by this man whose face was blurred and was said to be a retired colonel. The man said Iranians have this kind of wish that Israel will go further than it had in the April and October retaliatory strikes, so that the nation will be emboldened and take to the streets, which might have some truth to it because they've had a lot of societal upheaval throughout the years, especially regarding protests against the current regime. But regardless, this is still this is not trustworthy, right? They themselves will cut the regime's roots from the country, he added, noting the weakening of Iran's air defenses and its regional proxies. Also speaking to Channel 12, a man said to have been a cleric in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a man said to have been, which is separate from the military and answers directly to Khamenei, urged Israel to attack Iran. I don't see Israel as a criminal. We say death to Israel, but Israel doesn't say death to Iran, said the man whose face was also blurred, who used the pseudonym Javad. We've been friends since the days of Cyrus, he said. Cyrus saved the Jews of Babylon. Now we expect something in return, that you lend us a hand of friendship and that the power of Israeli army come to help the Iranian nation. So this is liberation tactic 101, right? What was that one operation we did back in the early 2000s? What was something about Iraqi freedom? All I know is that I don't know, what is this? Arash and Javad were both said to be speaking to Israel's Channel 12 and inside Iran. An exceptional feat given the country's tight censorship and its leaders' open commitment to destroy Israel. Well, thank God they were technological geniuses to be able to get such a message out directly to the television station from within that firewall. As part of that cause, Iran supports an axis of resistance network of regional proxies with all the big bads, mostly beginning with H. Arash said he had been forced to resign from the military after he refused to help train Hamas in guerrilla tactics and urban warfare. It was unclear when the episode had taken place. He noted Israel's recent successes against Iran's proxies in the wars in Gaza and Lebanon that followed October 7th, 2023, when the Hamas attack occurred. Hezbollah, unprovoked, began attacking Israel a day later. Everything else goes through. Israel has hurt the leaders of the resistance movements. In the pager attack and others, Nasrallah himself said they took a heavy blow, said Arash. What the IRGC thinks now is that Hamas won't recuperate. Hezbollah won't recuperate. Where do they place their stock? In Yemen. Okay? I don't think I have to go any further. This is fine if it's true. There's no verifiable sources here. And it's purely a piece of propaganda because there are no verifiable sources. If it is true, great, but then you can't verify any validity to it, so why put it out there? And that's the question you have to ask about any of this type of information that's being given to us. Why are they putting it out there? If they can't tell me the source and they can't prove that these people are real and they can't actually say that Iranians feel that way, because where's all the evidence of that then if that's the case, right? Oh, well, the firewall and the technological barrier, but the one that these two guys were able to just get through apparently. Why are they putting it out there, right? And that's the question you have to ask. And when you ask that question, you realize exactly why, right? It's to justify a war with Iran to the people of Israel to get that support, as well as to try to get some additional support from the U.S. as well, I'm sure. And then to frame that war as a liberation operation rather than it being an attack on an enemy, right? They're not our enemies. 95% of them want to be us. So we just need to help those 95% be us, because you know what? The other ones are being held hostage, and that's a problem, right? So I'm just trying to put it out there for you that we are, on our way, okay? Now, Tony Elbows says, I have decided to hit the like button just to show my support. And I appreciate you for that, Tony. So if anybody else wants to do that as well, I would really like it. So thank you for that, Tony, and thank you for everyone else who does such a thing, because it does help the channel. Now, we also have some other great people here in the chat, including D's Nuts. So, and you know what's great is that they really are in the chat. So I can say that, and it's not even ironic. It's just the truth. And I appreciate them being here for me to just be able to do that. So thank you. Coltrane, who is having corned beef and cabbage tonight? Not me, because I waited too long to buy it, and now I don't have it. So that's unfortunate. T. Fisher says, fully agree. We don't need more war, and I agree with that as well. And I'm trying my best to understand these things before I just go out fully against it, because I have to keep in mind that my bias of being anti-war in general is going to cloud my judgment of why things are occurring. So I try to take a step back and absorb some of what's happening. But I have to be honest with myself, and I have to be critical of things I disagree with, regardless of who's doing them, right? So that's just part of the deal. And I feel like you have to be like that if you want to be well-rounded in your information, right? Cherokee Survival 8340, good to see you, and I appreciate you hitting that like button too. You guys are awesome tonight. I really, really appreciate it. Now, I do have a couple other things I want to touch on, because World War III, right, a big chunk of it came along with Russia and Ukraine. So there's some new developments there, and I want to touch on those too to kind of give you an idea of where that's all heading. But this kind of will round out my discussion about what trajectory I think we're currently on and what is a possibility I think we should consider, because it's something that I hadn't really considered, but I think we might be heading more in that direction soon. And I'm skeptical, but also reasonable, I guess, in regards to why I might agree with it even to a certain point. Let's do this. Okay, first off, Trump and Putin are having a call tomorrow. Okay, this should be very interesting. It's specifically about peace talks, okay? It won't be the first time that Putin and Trump have spoken this year, but tomorrow's phone call between the two leaders is shaping up to be a significant one. And if you're on Replay Crew, it's today for you. Or it was yesterday or a few days before. Who knows? But Replay Crew, you guys are awesome. Okay. For one, it'll mark the first known conversation the two presidents have had since Ukraine agreed to support a U.S.-backed ceasefire. The Kremlin confirmed earlier today that preparations were being made for the call, but refused to be drawn on what exactly they would discuss. The White House has said that Trump plans to discuss land, power plants, and dividing up certain assets. Ukraine will undoubtedly be top of mind for both leaders, particularly since it was just 1 week ago that American and Ukrainian delegates agreed on proposals for a 30-day ceasefire. Putin said that he supported the idea, but added there are still nuances to be worked out. Today, European and Ukrainian officials have voiced their opinions on what the outcome of tomorrow's talks might be, with some putting pressure on Putin to provide more receipts for his supposed support of a ceasefire. Now, we all know that there's stipulations involved here. So we can't expect things to go smoothly, but we know that there's going to have to be some compromise or there will not be a ceasefire or peace at all. So those compromises are going to come in some form or shape. And they're talking about land and power plants and assets and that's a lot to consider, right? We've just heard from Donald Trump, who is currently on a visit to the nearby Kennedy Center for Performing Arts here in Washington, D.C. Speaking to reporters briefly, Trump says he hopes to discuss the plight of Ukrainian soldiers during his call with Putin tomorrow, who he says are completely surrounded by Russian forces in the Kursk region. Now, this is happening tomorrow. So big news could come from that. We will see. Now, what are they discussing? We're not 100% sure, of course, but the idea of possibly giving Russia the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant as part of that deal is apparently on the table, okay? I guess you have to negotiate with what leverage you have or what assets you have, but this is an interesting development. But to be fair, gaining control of a nuclear power plant, the largest one in the country, is a good way to incentivize things when it comes to economic assets, right? U.S. President Donald Trump said he would speak to Russia's Vladimir Putin on Tuesday morning about ending the Ukraine war, with territorial concessions by Kiev and control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant likely to feature prominently in the talks. What's happening in Ukraine is not good, but we're going to see if we can work a peace agreement, a ceasefire and peace, and I think we'll be able to do it, Trump told reporters in Washington on Monday. Okay, so listen, the power plant's on the table. Now, in the past, this is what Russia's been demanding. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up so everybody's on the same page about what they want in order for anything to move forward. And that gives you an idea of how successful this could possibly be, right? Okay. Russia has presented the U.S. with a list of demands for a potential deal to end the war against Ukraine and reset relations with Washington, Reuters reported on March 13th, citing two undisclosed sources. According to the sources, Russian and U.S. officials discussed these demands during a face-to-face virtual conversation over the past 3 weeks. These broad conditions are said to largely mirror those Russia has previously made to Ukraine, the U.S., and NATO. The exact content of the list remains unclear, however, as does the issue of whether Russia is willing to engage in peace talks with Kiev before these conditions are met. Russia's previously voiced conditions have included Ukraine permanently abandoning NATO aspirations, prohibiting foreign troop deployments on Ukrainian soil, and recognizing Crimea and 4 partially occupied regions, the Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia oblasts, as Russian territory. So that's what the expectation is that they're going to ask for or want. Now, keep this in mind, because as this moves forward, listen. There are clearly forces at work that want this war to continue. The military-industrial complex wants the war to continue. They want their bank accounts to keep getting stuffed. They want to keep laundering money. They want to keep selling weapons. They want to keep everything going, right? And I think we can see that the leaders in Europe right now, the ones who allow blatant, unchecked immigration to destroy their country slowly, they're all coming together and saying that they want to keep the war going, right? So, and I think we all know why. But regardless, very destabilizing, right? Regardless, part of that agreement for Russia was no foreign troops deployed in Ukraine. And all we keep hearing now, right, how many years into the war? 3 years into the war. Now we're going to start deploying troops from the UK and France into Ukraine. So, like, the timing is questionable. And the idea is, well, would this be a bargaining chip for those countries now to say, well, our troops are already there and we're not comfortable pulling them out unless X, Y, or Z, right? And if those troops are there, maybe Russia can't commit to any type of peace agreement. So it puts the US in a bad negotiating spot because we have to get Ukraine or the UK and France to pull their troops out in order to get an agreement with Russia that they might not agree with. So there's a lot of different pieces going into this, right? And not to mention, they did have Putin say previously that he'd be willing to accept the idea of like peacekeepers on Ukrainian soil. But who knows what those stipulations would be? Where would they have to come from? Who would they have to be? Like, there's a lot of different considerations there. So I don't know how successful these conversations are going to be. Tomorrow could be very progressive or it could be very detrimental. We just don't know quite yet. But here's what I want to bring up, okay? And this is going to be Magic Prepper speculation time. We're going to discuss things without any news reports on the screen for a minute, and I'm just going to tell you give you some ideas about what I think could be occurring here and that we should be prepared to anticipate just in case, okay? So, hear me out. Originally, I assumed that the push to end the war in Russia was to reestablish economic dominance in the sense of getting trade routes stabilized while also gaining all those assets in Ukraine, rare earth minerals, resources, everything else that we're willing to try to give them in order to pay us back for all the stuff that's been going on over the years, while at the same time being part of a ceasefire deal and a peace agreement negotiation, right? So, like, we're trying to end that war so that we can stop supplying it, so that we can stop sending money to it, so that we can start making money from the region again, so that we can reopen safer supply routes and get gas pipelines back online without being sabotaged every other day, and everything else related to trying to stop the hemorrhaging that conflict is causing. Now, the original thought behind that for me was this idea that we're trying to aggressively do that and we're willing to give up certain things or compromise on certain things in order to end that situation so we can focus on the true enemy, which would be, China, right? So that we can get prepared for a true near-peer adversary here in the future that may actually be a problem for us. And I think that's a reasonable line of thinking. However, now with the additional escalations in the Middle East, and now with the sights being set on Iran, and now with some of the recent movements we've seen with the U.S. somewhat appearing to pull back a little bit in the Pacific and pull back in the sense of being so aggressive about Chinese and Taiwanese relations, right? That although we have changed verbiage within our State Department regarding Taiwan's independence and things of that nature, we do have Taiwan investing $100 billion in the U.S., building chip production facilities here. I'm starting to wonder if this is all part of a bigger strategy to bring China to the table rather than force them to be an enemy. And now why I'm saying that is because we have seen some military pullback from the Pacific, right? We have New Zealand raising alarms and Australia raising alarms about it, saying that they're not sure about the sovereignty or the security of the South China Sea and the South Pacific and everything else because now China's moving around with impunity and all these other things. And then we also have Taiwan basically saying, that they're trying to establish themselves to not require, China, but at the same time, if we get them to invest here, how much do we have to invest in protecting them there? Maybe we just need them to be here so we don't have to worry about there. And if we don't have to worry about there, if you think of it this way, Greenland, Canada, all these discussions about, land acquirements and everything else, Ukraine, Gaza, all this stuff, right? The big sovereign wealth portfolio and everything else that's going on. Taiwan becomes a bargaining chip itself. It becomes leverage for China. It can bring China to the negotiating table the same way Ukraine is bringing Russia to the negotiating table right now. And if we can establish better trade with China, instead of alienating them or instead of antagonizing them to become a greater enemy of the state or whatever it may be, maybe there's a motive here to create a more robust trade partner in order to avoid pure economic failure. I don't know, but like the way things are going, I'm starting to feel like there might be more to the equation that's not so obvious, right? Because before I was like, well, we have to stop the Ukrainian war because we'll never be able to fight off China if things go south. And if they invade Taiwan right now, how would we deal with that with all these resources being spent in Eastern Europe, with all of our money falling into the drain, with all of our weapons being depleted and everything else? But maybe that's not actually the concern. And maybe the concern is, how do we establish a more fair or economically dominating partnership with China? Because in all reality, obviously there's a trade partnership there already that's extremely beneficial for the American people when it comes to cheap consumer products. Do I like it? No. Do I think it might be necessary economically to maintain any type of forward progression in the moment? Possibly, right? So just be aware that I think things might take a different turn here in the near future based on what I'm currently seeing. And I think Iran and that Middle Eastern situation regarding Israel and everything else in that area is more of less of a risk with a higher reward if things go as planned, because Iran is not China, right? Yes, they're somewhat technologically advanced. Yes, they have access to certain weapons and stuff. And yes, they have alliances, of course. But Iran doesn't weigh enough to sway Russia or China from not doing business with the United States, right? Like, they still want our money if possible. It's still beneficial for them for us to send money to them. So I'm just feeling like the focus is going back to the Middle East, and there might just be a more economic situation between us and China regarding an allianceship in the future rather than an adversarial relationship. And that's just kind of how I feel. I don't know. It's just based on reading and research and everything else that's been happening lately. It's starting to feel like we're willing to talk, let's say. So that's where I'm at. You guys let me know in the chat how you feel about it. But that's kind of where I'm feeling, right? Robert P says TSMC moving here is only good for us. Yes. But it's also good for us if we don't need TSMC in Taiwan anymore, right? You understand what I'm saying? Like, you see how if you remove that necessity of maintaining control of the island because you have the established necessity here in the country, you suddenly have a different form of leverage with said island rather than you can't have it because we need it. Now it turns into, well, we don't need it, so what were you willing to do to have it, right? So, like, I don't know. My brain is weird. You guys know that. Hudson Valley Prepping and Survival, thank you so much for being here. Good to see you. And thanks for encouraging the like button smash because, yeah, let's do that. Now, Dusty says, I almost bought a gas station fake joint. Well, I'm glad you didn't, Dusty, and that's probably a bad idea. Also, speaking of gas stations, I was recently told from a trusted source to be careful because card skimmers and credit card fraud is off the charts right now. And it does seem to have, let's just say, adjacency to people that don't like us right now. And when I say that, I don't just mean your average street criminals, right? So just be aware of that. I can't verify that right this second, but I trust this source and I trust that they wouldn't lead me astray and that they want you to know about it because you need to be careful. So at gas stations, it's always better and safer to use a credit card rather than like a debit card, right? Because if they do skim your card, you can contest it with your credit card company, and it's a lot easier to get things to come off of a credit card than it is to get things to be reversed in a bank account, right? Not to mention you might not be giving access to your bank account in that process. So just keep all those things in mind, but I am hearing that whole scheme is escalating and not necessarily for just stealing money, okay? You can legally rip the skimmer off the scanner, says Silent Guard. True, but not everybody knows what to look for and not everybody realizes when there is one. So that's another concern, right? Either way, I hope tonight's conversation was beneficial for you. If it was, please make sure you share it and let other people know about it because the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 is very interesting and I think it's being used right now for a good, just purpose, but I think it could be problematic if things go too far. So we have to keep an eye out. We just have to. It's just part of being an American. You got to watch your government no matter who's in charge. And at the same time, what's happening between us and Iran, Israel and Iran, and then everything going on with Ukraine and Russia. When was the Alien Enemies Act last invoked? War of 1812, World War I, World War II, and now? And now. Right? So, if you guys want to be part of the private live stream, that is right after this one. Starts at 9:15 Central Standard Time. And to do that, you can hit the join button down below. Become a channel member. You'll have access to the private live stream by going to my channel, clicking on the post tab, and you'll see a post with that unlisted private link right there for you if you are indeed a channel member. Or if you want to join the Subscribe Star, that's $5 a month. You support the channel directly. I have some things coming out here soon that Subscribe Star members will have pre-access to compared to everybody else. And it's also a great way to get a hold of me if you want to just send me direct messages there or just chat about things. I'm there on Subscribestar, and that's $5 a month. And I just put that link in the chat as well as in the description. So anything else you need from me at all, you can go to magicprepper.com. Make sure you check that website out. Things will be changing over there here in the near future because I am going to be offering some things to the community that are a little bit outside of my comfort zone, but I also think that they're valuable, and I hope that I don't know, maybe you guys would be interested. So besides that, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.